Hi, I'm Lindsay, and this is Kinda Healthy Podcast. While it might sound like something out of a fairy tale or a ghost story, several people really have claimed that stress has made their hair turn completely white overnight. In fact, the nickname given to the particular occurrence comes from one of the most well-known examples in history. In 1793, on the evening Marie Antoinette, the dethroned Queen of France, marched to the guillotine, her hair had turned completely white. The color change of her crowning locks became a hallmark of the French Revolution, and it's a historical footnote so compelling that today it describes a medical condition in which a person's hair suddenly loses its color. Marie Antoinette syndrome occurs when people lose their hair color after receiving a great shock, undergoing a grievous loss, or surviving a life-threatening situation. From English martyrs in the 16th century to World War II bombing survivors, history is ripe with accounts of hair turning silver within just a few hours or days of a traumatic event. But are these tales legitimately historical or historical fiction? One of the most often repeated tales comes from the 18th century France. Marie Antoinette was just 37 when she was sentenced to death in 1791. As legend has it, the night before she was to be executed by guillotine, her hair turned white. The story has been around for so long that when others have made similar claims, it's been called Marie Antoinette syndrome. Interestingly, the ill-fated French queen wasn't the only well-known historical figure to make such a claim. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Sir Thomas More are also said to have emerged for their executions with an inexplicably white head of hair. Although reported cases of Marie Antoinette syndrome have been few in modern medical literature, they continue to be intriguing for doctors and researchers. With help from historians, these professionals have managed to unravel some of the mysteries behind the fascinating condition, which may not be quite what it seems. Unlike the natural graying of hair that takes place as people get older, Marie Antoinette syndrome has been reported in people of all ages, including the relatively young. The condition is also said to differ from the natural graying process in the timing. Most cases claim to have occurred suddenly, seemingly overnight, rather than gradually. Doctors generally regard Marie Antoinette syndrome, as the stories define it, as being a myth. However, when medical professionals do encounter cases like the condition today, it's usually referred to as canietis subita, Latin for sudden gray hair. A 1957 review of literature on rapid whitening of hair provided several anecdotes. Though few were witnessed by medical professionals, the stories had common themes, including unexpected traumatic and/or life-threatening events, house fires, accidents, or the sudden death of a loved one. Some people had other symptoms at the time their hair went white, such as hair loss or patches of discoloration on their skin. A few people were thought to have specific conditions, such as alopecia or vitiligo. More recent accounts of the symptoms have had more gradual than sudden onset. For example, in 2009, researchers at the University of Zurich wrote a short case note on a female patient with alopecia areata. The 54-year-old's hair turned white over the course of several weeks. However, unlike the legends in other cases, the woman was healthy, not under any extreme stress, and hadn't experienced recent trauma. While the case was unusual and went medically unexplained, doctors regarded it as being impossible, especially since it hadn't happened overnight. Scholars suspect that the appearance of rapidly graying hair in the infamous historical anecdotes was most likely attributed to very simple causes. For example, prior to her execution, Marie Antoinette had been imprisoned and would not have had access to cosmetics or hair dye. In other cases, severe hair loss may have been to blame. Even people who are relatively young, in their teens and 20s, can have gray or white hair in places. If the colored hair were to fall out or to thin, the hair lacking pigment would be more visible and stark. It's also important to understand how hair pigment works. Hair gets its color from melanin. One kind of melanin determines how dark the hair is, while the other gives its undertones, usually red or yellow. Gradually, as people get older, the body makes less melanin. There may also be another factor that leads to gray hair. Mouse studies have suggested that cells responsible for making melanin might also produce hydrogen peroxide, which is commonly used to bleach hair. An enzyme called catalase can break down the hydrogen peroxide and prevent it from having an effect on pigmented strands of hair, at least until we start to get older. Like melanin, the body also produces less catalase as we age. It's been suggested that the combination of less melanin and more hydrogen peroxide is the mechanism that makes hair become white. Researchers also use mouse experiments to look at how stress affects the stem cells in hair follicles that are responsible for making melanocytes, the pigment-producing cells that give hair its color: black, brown, blonde, red, or somewhere in between. People generally have around 100,000 hair follicles on their scalp. The researchers initially suspected that a stress-induced immune attack might be targeting the melanocyte stem cells, but that hypothesis didn't pan out. Then they decided to explore the hormone cortisol. Mice were subjected to short-term pain or placed in stressful laboratory conditions. Stress always elevates levels of cortisol in the body, so it was thought cortisol could play a role, but surprisingly, when the adrenal gland was removed, so cortisol-like hormones couldn't be produced, their hair still turned gray. So it didn't explain exactly how stress was activating those stem cells. It was soon discovered that norepinephrine seemed to be triggering the excessive stem cell depletion, but removing the animal's primary source, the adrenal gland, didn't stop it. The solution to the mystery source of norepinephrine was the sympathetic nervous system, or our fight-or-flight system. Normally, when hair regenerates, some of those stem cells convert into pigment-producing cells that color the hair. But when they are exposed to norepinephrine from the sympathetic nerve, all of the stem cells are activated and converted into pigment-producing cells. And that means that there are none left. In just a few days, the reservoir of pigment-generating stem cells is depleted, and once they're gone, you can't regenerate pigment anymore. Acute stress, particularly the fight-or-flight response, has been traditionally viewed as beneficial for animal survival. But in this case, acute stress causes permanent depletion of stem cells. So what particular evolutionary function does this kind of stress-induced graying serve? Because gray hair is most often linked to age, it could be associated with experience, leadership, and trust. For example, adult male silverback mountain gorillas, which get gray hair on their backs after reaching full maturity, can go on to lead a gorilla troop. So maybe an animal that has endured enough stress to earn gray hair has a higher place in the social order that would normally be determined by an individual's age. When and to what extent someone starts to go gray depends on several factors, including genetics. While people often joke about stress giving them gray hairs, scientists do think it could play a role. In 2011, a group of researchers published the results of a mouse study that suggested DNA damage caused by chronic stress could have an impact on when someone's hair starts to go gray. Everything from stress hormones to free radicals have been implicated as potentially hastening the graying process. However, this doesn't quite explain how someone's hair could go white, as in accounts of Candida subita. Strands of hair that are visible on a person's head, referred to as the hair shaft, don't contain any living cells. Therefore, the hair on the head isn't considered vulnerable to direct effects of psychological stress. So it seems like most accounts of people's hair suddenly turning white in a short amount of time just seem to be kind of accents to a dramatic story. It can happen in movies, but the process is really a lot more complicated than they would have you think. So go ahead and give somebody a spook. I mean, it's not like you're going to make their hair turn white. Okay, I really thought about yelling boo or something right there, but I won't do it. If you'd like to look into Marie Antoinette syndrome some more, I'll have some links in the description, and I'll talk to you next week.